Welcome to Redhead Rewriting Reality by Kimberly Sue Iverson, the story of my life as I figure out who I am after a lifetime of abuse and share my journey with that. Sharing my journey of building my author career, the struggles, bettering self, and creating a new life. I'm a multi-genre author who's published more than 53 stories and coming to you from the Pacific Northwest. And this podcast is for you because, like me, you love stories, journeys, and you just want to relax for a bit. So let me take care of you. This audio is intended for an adult audience. Themes and topics may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Now, get yourself comfy and make yourself at home. And let's dive in. We're gonna get into it today. Right into it. Whatever I'm trying to say. Tarzan of the Apes by Edgar Rice Burroughs. Read by your host, Kimberly Sue Iverson. Chapter 23. Brother Min. When D'Arnaud regained consciousness, he found himself lying upon a bed of soft ferns and grasses beneath a little A-shaped shelter of boughs. At his feet, an opening looked out upon a great sward, and at a little distance beyond was the dense wall of jungle and forest. He was very lame and sore and weak, and as full consciousness returned, he felt the sharp torture of many cruel wounds, and the dull aching of every bone and muscle in his body as a result of the hideous beating he had received. Even the turning of his head caused him such excruciating agony that he lay still with closed eyes for a long time. He tried to piece out the details of his adventure prior to the time he lost consciousness to see if they would explain his present whereabouts. He wondered if he were among friends or foes. At length he recollected the whole hideous scene at the stake, and finally recalled the strange white figure in whose arms he had sunk into oblivion. D'Arnaud wondered what fate lay in store for him now. He could neither see nor hear any signs of life about him. The incessant hum of the jungle, the rustling of millions of leaves, the buzz of insects, the voices of the birds and monkeys seemed blended into a strangely soothing purr, as though he lay apart, far from the myriad life, whose sounds came to him only as a blurred echo. At length he fell into a quiet slumber, nor did he awaken again until afternoon. Once more he experienced the strange sense of utter bewilderment that had marked his earlier awakening, but soon he recalled the recent past, and looking through the opening at his feet, he saw the figure of a man squatting on his haunches. The broad, muscular back was turned toward him, but tanned though it was, D'Arnaud saw that it was the back of a white man, and he thanked God. The Frenchman called faintly. The man turned, and rising, came toward the shelter. His face was very handsome, the handsomest, thought D'Arnaud, that he had ever seen. Stooping, he crawled into the shelter beside the wounded officer and placed a cool hand upon his forehead. D'Arnaud spoke to him in French, but the man only shook his head. Sadly, it seemed to the Frenchman. Then D'Arnaud tried English, but still the man shook his head. Italian, Spanish, and German brought similar discouragement. D'Arnaud knew a few words of Norwegian, Russian, Greek, and also had a smattering of the language of one of the West Coast Negro tribes. The man denied them all. After examining Darnau's wounds, the man left the shelter and disappeared. In half an hour he was back, with fruit and a hollow gourd-like vegetable filled with water. Darnau drank and ate a little. He was surprised that he had no fever. Again he tried to converse with his strange nurse, but the attempt was useless. Suddenly the man hastened from the shelter, only to return a few minutes later with several pieces of bark and, wonder of wonders, a lead pencil. Squatting beside Darnau, he wrote for a minute on the smooth inner surface of the bark. Then he handed it to the Frenchman. Darnau was astonished to see, in plain, print-like characters, a message in English. I am Tarzan of the Apes. Who are you? Can you read this language? Darnau seized the pencil, then he stopped. This strange man wrote English. Evidently he was an Englishman. Yes, said Darnau, I read English. I speak it also. Now we may talk. First, let me thank you for all that you have done for me. The man only shook his head and pointed to the pencil and the bark. Mon Dieu! Cried Darnau. If you are English, why is it then that you cannot speak English? And then in a flash it came to him. The man was a mute, possibly a deaf mute. So Darnau wrote a message on the bark in English. I am Paul Darnau, Lieutenant in the Navy of France. I thank you for what you have done for me. You have saved my life, and all that I have is yours. May I ask how it is that one who writes English does not speak it? Tarzan's reply filled Darnau with still greater wonder. I speak only the language of my tribe, the great apes who were Kershaks, and a little of the languages of Tantor, the elephant, and Numa, the lion, and of the other folks of the jungle I understand. With a human being I have never spoken, except once with Jane Porter, by signs. This is the first time I have spoken with another of my kind through written words. Darnau was mystified. It seemed incredible that there lived upon earth a full-grown man who had never spoken with a fellow man, and still more preposterous that such a one could read and write. He looked again at Tarzan's message, except once with Jane Porter. That was the American girl who had been carried into the jungle by a gorilla. A sudden light commenced to dawn on Darnau. Then this was the gorilla. He seized the pencil and wrote, Where is Jane Porter? And Tarzan replied, Below, back with her people in the cabin of Tarzan of the Apes. She is not dead then? Where was she? What happened to her? She is not dead. She was taken by Turcos to be his wife, but Tarzan of the Apes took her away from Turcos and killed him before he could harm her. None in all the jungle may face Tarzan of the Apes in battle and live. I am Tarzan of the Apes, mighty fighter. Darnau wrote, I am glad she is safe. It pains me to write. I will rest a while. And then Tarzan, yes, rest. When you are well, I shall take you back to your people. For many days Darnau lay upon his bed of soft ferns. The second day a fever had come, and Darnau thought that it meant infection, and he knew that he would die. An idea came to him. He wondered why he had not thought of it before. He called Tarzan and indicated by signs that he would write, and when Tarzan had fetched the bark and pencil, D'Arnot wrote, "Can you go to my people and lead them here? I will write a message that you may take to them, and they will follow you." Tarzan shook his head and taking the bark wrote, "I had thought of that the first day, but I dared not. The great apes come often to this spot, and if they found you here, wounded and alone, they would kill you." D'Arnot turned on his side and closed his eyes. He did not wish to die, but he felt that he was going, for the fever was mounting higher and higher. That night he lost consciousness. For 3 days he was in delirium, and Tarzan sat beside him and bathed his head and hands and washed his wounds. On the 4th day the fever broke as suddenly as it had come, but it left D'Arnot a shadow of his former self and very weak. Tarzan had to lift him that he might drink from the gourd. The fever had not been the result of infection as D'Arnot had thought, but one of those that commonly attack whites in the jungles of Africa, and either kill or leave them as suddenly as D'Arnot's had left him. 2 days later, D'Arnot was tottering about the amphitheater, Tarzan's strong arm about him to keep him from falling. They sat beneath the shade of a great tree, and Tarzan found some smooth bark that they might converse. D'Arnot wrote the first message. "What can I do to repay you for all that you have done for me?" And Tarzan in reply, "Teach me to speak the language of men." And so D'Arnot commenced at once, pointing out familiar objects and repeating their names in French, for he thought that it would be easier to teach this man his own language, since he understood it himself best of all. It meant nothing to Tarzan, of course, for he could not tell one language from another. So when he pointed to the word man which he had printed upon a piece of bark, he learned from D'Arnot that it was pronounced homme, and in the same way he was taught to pronounce ape, singe, and tree, arbre. He was a most eager student, and in 2 more days had mastered so much French that he could speak little sentences, such as, "That is a tree," "This is grass," "I am hungry," and the like. But D'Arnot found that it was difficult to teach him the French construction upon a foundation of English. The Frenchman wrote little lessons for him in English, and had Tarzan repeat them in French. But as a literal translation was usually very poor French, Tarzan was often confused. D'Arnot realized now that he had made a mistake, but it seemed too late to go back and do it all over again and force Tarzan to unlearn all that he had learned, especially as they were rapidly approaching a point where they would be able to converse. On the 3rd day after the fever broke, Tarzan wrote a message asking D'Arnot if he felt strong enough to be carried back to the cabin. Tarzan was as anxious to go as D'Arnot, for he longed to see Jane again. It had been hard for him to remain with the Frenchman all these days for that very reason, and that he had unselfishly done so spoke more glowingly of his nobility of character than even did his rescuing the French officer from Mubanga's clutches. D'Arnot, only too willing to attempt the journey, wrote, "But you cannot carry me all the distance through this tangled forest." Tarzan laughed. "Mais oui," he said, and D'Arnot laughed aloud to hear the phrase that he used so often glide from Tarzan's tongue. So they set out. D'Arnot marveling, as had Clayton and Jane, at the wondrous strength and agility of the ape-man. Mid-afternoon brought them to the clearing, and as Tarzan dropped to earth from the branches of the last tree, his heart leaped and bounded against his ribs in anticipation of seeing Jane so soon again. No one was in sight outside the cabin, and D'Arnot was perplexed to note that neither the cruiser nor the Arrow was at anchor in the bay. An atmosphere of loneliness pervaded the spot, which caught suddenly at both men as they strode toward the cabin. Neither spoke, yet both knew before they opened the closed door what they would find beyond. Tarzan lifted the latch and pushed the great door in upon its wooden hinges. It was as they had feared. The cabin was deserted. The men turned and looked at one another. D'Arnot knew that his people thought him dead, but Tarzan thought only of the woman who had kissed him in love, and now had fled from him while he was serving one of her people. A great bitterness rose in his heart. He would go away far into the jungle and join his tribe. Never would he see one of his own kind again, nor could he bear the thought of returning to the cabin. He would leave that forever behind him, with the great hopes he had nursed there of finding his own race and becoming a man among men. And the Frenchman, D'Arnot, what of him? He could get along as Tarzan had. Tarzan did not want to see him more. He wanted to get away from everything that might remind him of Jane. As Tarzan stood upon the threshold brooding, D'Arnot had entered the cabin. Many comforts he saw that had been left behind. He recognized numerous articles from the cruiser: a camp oven, some kitchen utensils, a rifle, and many rounds of ammunition, canned foods, blankets, 2 chairs and a cot, and several books and periodicals, mostly American. They must intend returning, thought D'Arnot. He walked over to the table that John Clayton had built so many years before to serve as a desk, and on it he saw 2 notes addressed to Tarzan of the Apes. One was in a strong masculine hand and was unsealed. The other, in a woman's hand, was sealed. "Here are 2 messages for you, Tarzan of the Apes," cried D'Arnot, turning toward the door, but his companion was not there. D'Arnot walked to the door and looked out. Tarzan was nowhere in sight. He called aloud, but there was no response. "Mon Dieu!" exclaimed D'Arnot. "He has left me. I feel it. He has gone back into his jungle and left me here alone." And then he remembered the look on Tarzan's face when they had discovered that the cabin was empty. Such a look as the hunter sees in the eyes of the wounded deer he has wantonly brought down. The man had been hard hit. D'Arnot realized it now. But why? He could not understand. The Frenchman looked about him. The loneliness and the horror of the place commenced to get on his nerves. Already weakened by the ordeal of suffering and sickness he had passed through, to be left here alone beside this awful jungle, never to hear a human voice or see a human face, in constant dread of savage beasts and more terribly savage men, a prey to solitude and hopelessness. It was awful. And far to the east, Tarzan of the Apes was speeding through the middle terrace back to his tribe. Never had he traveled with such reckless speed. He felt that he was running away from himself, that by hurtling through the forest like a frightened squirrel, he was escaping his own thoughts. But no matter how fast he went, he found them always with him. He passed above the sinuous body of Sabor the lioness, going in the opposite direction. Toward the cabin, thought Tarzan. What could D'Arnot do against Sabor? Or if Bolgani the gorilla should come upon him, or Numa the lion, or cruel Sheeta? Tarzan paused in his flight. "What are you, Tarzan?" he asked aloud. "An ape or a man? If you are an ape, you will do as the apes would do. Leave one of your kind to die in the jungle if it suited your whim to go elsewhere. If you are a man, you will return to protect your kind. You will not run away from one of your own people, because one of them has run away from you." D'Arnot closed the cabin door. He was very nervous. Even brave men, and D'Arnot was a brave man, are sometimes frightened by solitude. He loaded one of the rifles and placed it within easy reach. Then he went to the desk and took up the unsealed letter addressed to Tarzan. Possibly it contained word that his people had but left the beach temporarily. He felt that it would be no breach of ethics to read this letter, so he took the enclosure from the envelope and read, "To Tarzan of the Apes, we thank you for the use of your cabin, and are sorry that you did not permit us the pleasure of seeing and thanking you in person. We have harmed nothing, but have left many things for you, which may add to your comfort and safety here in your lonely home. If you know the strange white man who saved our lives so many times, and brought us food, and if you can converse with him, thank him also for his kindness. We sail within the hour, never to return, but we wish you and that other jungle friend to know that we shall always thank you for what you did for strangers on your shore, and that we should have done infinitely more to reward you both had you given us the opportunity. Very respectfully, W. M. Cecil Clayton." "Never to return," muttered D'Arnot, and threw himself face downward upon the cot. An hour later he started up, listening. Something was at the door trying to enter. D'Arnot reached for the loaded rifle and placed it to his shoulder. Dusk was falling, and the interior of the cabin was very dark, but the man could see the latch moving from its place. He felt his hair rising upon his scalp. Gently the door opened until a thin crack showed something standing just beyond. D'Arnot sighted along the blue barrel at the crack of the door, and then he pulled the trigger. Chapter 24. Lost Treasure. When the expedition returned, following their fruitless endeavor to succor D'Arnot, Captain Dufresne was anxious to steam away as quickly as possible, and all save Jane had acquiesced. "No," she said determinedly, "I shall not go, nor should you, for there are two friends in that jungle who will come out of it some day, expecting to find us awaiting them. Your officer, Captain Dufresne, is one of them, and the forest man who has saved the lives of every member of my father's party is the other. He left me at the edge of the jungle 2 days ago to hasten to the aid of my father and Mr. Clayton, as he thought, and he has stayed to rescue Lieutenant D'Arnot. Of that you may be sure. Had he been too late to be of service to the lieutenant, he would have been back before now. The fact that he is not back is sufficient proof to me that he is delayed because Lieutenant D'Arnot is wounded. or he has had to follow his captors further than the village which your sailors attacked. But poor D'Arnaud's uniform and all his belongings were found in that village, Miss Porter, argued the captain, and the natives showed great excitement when questioned as to the white man's fate. Yes, Captain, but they did not admit that he was dead. And as for his clothes and accoutrements being in their possession, why, more civilized peoples than these poor savage Negroes strip their prisoners of every article of value, whether they intend killing them or not. Even the soldiers of my own dear South looted not only the living but the dead. It is strong circumstantial evidence, I will admit, but it is not positive proof. Possibly your forest man himself was captured or killed by the savages, suggested Captain Dufresne. The girl laughed. You do not know him, she replied, a little thrill of pride setting her nerves a-tingle at the thought that she spoke of her own. I admit that he would be worth waiting for, this Superman of yours, laughed the captain. I most certainly should like to see him. Then wait for him, my dear captain, urged the girl, for I intend doing so. The Frenchman would have been a very much surprised man, could he have interpreted the true meaning of the girl's words. They had been walking from the beach toward the cabin as they talked, and now they joined a little group sitting on camp stools in the shade of a great tree beside the cabin. Professor Porter was there, and Mr. Flander and Clayton, with Lieutenant Charpentier and 2 of his brother officers, while Esmeralda hovered in the background, ever and anon venturing opinions and comments, with the freedom of an old and much indulged family servant. The officers arose and saluted as their superior approached, and Clayton surrendered his camp stool to Jane. We were just discussing poor Paul's fate, said Captain Dufresne. Miss Porter insists that we have no absolute proof of his death, nor have we. And on the other hand, she maintains that the continued absence of your omnipotent jungle friend indicates that D'Arnaud is still in need of his services, either because he is wounded or still is a prisoner in a more distant native village. It has been suggested, ventured Lieutenant Charpentier, that the wild man may have been a member of the tribe of blacks who attacked our party, that he was hastening to aid them, his own people. Jane shot a quick glance at Clayton. It seems vastly more reasonable, said Professor Porter. I do not agree with you, objected Mr. Flander. He had ample opportunity to harm us himself or to lead his people against us. Instead, during our long residence here, he has been uniformly consistent in his role of protector and provider. That is true, interjected Clayton. Yet we must not overlook the fact that except for himself, the only human beings within hundreds of miles are savage cannibals. He was armed precisely as they are, which indicates that he has maintained relations of some nature with them, and the fact that he is but one against possibly thousands suggests that these relations could scarcely have been other than friendly. It seems improbable, then, that he is not connected with them, remarked the captain, possibly a member of this tribe. Otherwise, added another of the officers, how could he have lived a sufficient length of time among the savage denizens of the jungle, brute and human, to have become proficient in woodcraft, or in the use of African weapons? You are judging him according to your own standards, gentlemen, said Jane. An ordinary white man, such as any of you, pardon me, I did not mean just that, rather a white man above the ordinary in physique and intelligence could never, I grant you, have lived a year alone and naked in this tropical jungle. But this man not only surpasses the average white man in strength and agility, but as far transcends our trained athletes and strong men as they surpass a day-old babe, and his courage and ferocity in battle are those of the wild beast. He has certainly won a loyal champion, Miss Porter, said Captain Dufresne, laughing. I am sure that there be none of us here but would willingly face death 100 times in its most terrifying forms to deserve the tributes of one even half so loyal or so beautiful. You would not wonder that I defend him, said the girl, could you have seen him as I saw him, battling in my behalf with that huge, hairy brute. Could you have seen him charge the monster as a bull might charge a grizzly, absolutely without sign of fear or hesitation, you would have believed him more than human. Could you have seen those mighty muscles nodding under the brown skin? Could you have seen them force back those awful fangs? You too would have thought him invincible. And could you have seen the chivalrous treatment which he accorded a strange girl of a strange race, you would feel the same absolute confidence in him that I feel. You have won your suit, my fair pleader, cried the captain. This court finds the defendant not guilty, and the cruiser shall wait a few days longer, that he may have an opportunity to come and thank the divine Portia. For the Lord's sake, honey, cried Esmeralda, you all don't mean to tell me that you're going to stay right here in this here land of carnival animals when you all got the opportunity to escapade on that boat. Don't you tell me that, honey. Why, Esmeralda, you should be ashamed of yourself, cried Jane. Is this any way to show your gratitude to the man who saved your life twice? Well, Miss Jane, that's all just as you say. But there, that forest man never did save us to stay here. He done save us so we all could get away from here. I expect he be mighty peevish when he find we ain't got no more sense than to stay right here after he done give us the chance to get away. I hoped I'd never have to sleep in this here geological garden another night and listen to all them lonesome noises that come out of that jumble after dark. I don't blame you a bit, Esmeralda, said Clayton, and you certainly did hit it off right when you called them lonesome noises. I never have been able to find the right word for them, but that's it. Don't you know? Lonesome noises. You and Esmeralda had better go and live on the cruiser, said Jane in a fine scorn. What would you think if you had to live all your life in that jungle, as our forest man has done." "I'm afraid I'd be a blooming bounder as a wild man," laughed Clayton ruefully. "Those noises at night make the hair on my head bristle. I suppose that I should be ashamed to admit it, but it's the truth." "I don't know about that," said Lieutenant Charpentier. "I never thought much about fear and that sort of thing, never tried to determine whether I was a coward or a brave man. But the other night, as we lay in that jungle, there after poor D'Arnaud was taken, and those jungle noises rose and fell around us, I began to think that I was a coward indeed. It was not the roaring and growling of the big beasts that affected me so much as it was the stealthy noises, the ones that you heard suddenly close by, and then listened vainly for a repetition of, the unaccountable sounds as of a great body moving almost noiselessly, and the knowledge that you didn't know how close it was, or whether it were creeping closer after you ceased to hear it. It was those noises and the eyes. Mon Dieu! I shall see them in the dark forever. The eyes that you see, and those that you don't see, but feel, oh, they are the worst." All were silent for a moment, and then Jane spoke. "And he is out there," she said in an awe-hushed whisper. "Those eyes will be glaring at him tonight, and at your comrade, Lieutenant D'Arnaud. Can you leave them, gentlemen, without at least rendering them the passive succor which remaining here a few days longer might ensure them?" "Tut, tut, child," said Professor Porter. "Captain Dufresne is willing to remain, and for my part I am perfectly willing, as I always have been, to humor your childish whims." "We can utilize the morrow in recovering the chest, Professor," suggested Mr. Philander. Quite so, Mr. Philander. I had almost forgotten the treasure," exclaimed Professor Porter. "Possibly we can borrow some men from Captain Dufresne to assist us, and one of the prisoners to point out the location of the chest." "Most assuredly, my dear Professor. We are all yours to command," said the captain. And so it was arranged that on the next day Lieutenant Charpentier was to take a detail of 10 men and one of the mutineers of the Arrow as a guide, and unearth the treasure, and that the cruiser would remain for a full week in the little harbor. At the end of that time it was to be assumed that D'Arnaud was truly dead, and that the forest man would not return while they remained. Then the 2 vessels were to leave with all the party. Professor Porter did not accompany the treasure seekers on the following day, but when he saw them returning empty-handed toward noon, he hastened forward to meet them. His usual preoccupied indifference entirely vanished, and in its place a nervous and excited manner. "Where is the treasure?" he cried to Clayton, yet while 100 feet still separated them. Clayton shook his head. "Gone," he said as he neared the professor. "Gone! It cannot be. Who could have taken it?" cried Professor Porter. "God only knows, Professor. We might have thought the fellow who guided us was lying about the location, but his surprise and consternation on finding no chest beneath the body of the murdered Snipes were too real to be feigned, and then our spades showed us that something had been buried beneath the corpse, for a hole had been there, and it had been filled with loose earth. "But who could have taken it?" repeated Professor Porter. "Suspicion might naturally fall on the men of the cruiser," said Lieutenant Charpentier, "but for the fact that Sub-Lieutenant Janviers here assures me that no men have had shore leave, that none has been on shore since we anchored here except under command of an officer, I do not know that you would suspect our men, but I am glad that there is now no chance for suspicion to fall on them," he concluded. "It would never have occurred to me to suspect the men to whom we owe so much," replied Professor Porter graciously. "I would as soon suspect my dear Clayton here, or Mr. Philander." The Frenchmen smiled, both officers and sailors. It was plain to see that a burden had been lifted from their minds. "The treasure has been gone for some time," continued Clayton. "In fact, the body fell apart as we lifted it, which indicates that whoever removed the treasure did so while the corpse was still fresh, for it was intact when we first uncovered it." "There must have been several in the party," said Jane, who joined them. "You remember that it took 4 men to carry it?" "By Jove!" cried Clayton. "That's right. It must have been done by a party of blacks. Probably one of them saw the men bury the chest, and then returned immediately after with a party of his friends and carried it off." "Speculation is futile," said Professor Porter sadly. "The chest is gone. We shall never see it again, nor the treasure that was in it." Only Jane knew what the loss meant to her father, and none there knew what it meant to her. 6 days later, Captain Dufresne announced that they would sail early on the morrow. Jane would have begged for a further reprieve, had it not been that she too had begun to believe that her forest lover would return no more. In spite of herself, she began to entertain doubts and fears. The reasonableness of the arguments of these disinterested French officers commenced to convince her against her will. That he was a cannibal she would not believe, but that he was an adopted member of some savage tribe at length seemed possible to her. She would not admit that he could be dead. It was impossible to believe that that perfect body, so filled with triumphant life, could ever cease to harbor the vital spark, as soon believed that immortality were dust. As Jane permitted herself to harbor these thoughts, others equally unwelcome forced themselves upon her. If he belonged to some savage tribe, he had a savage wife, a dozen of them perhaps, and wild, half-cased children. The girl shuddered, and when they told her that the cruiser would sail on the morrow, she was almost glad. It was she, though, who suggested that arms, ammunition, supplies, and comforts be left behind in the cabin, ostensibly for that intangible personality who had signed himself Tarzan of the Apes, and for D'Arnot, should he still be living, but really, she hoped, for her forest god, even though his feet should prove of clay. And at the last minute she left a message for him, to be transmitted by Tarzan of the Apes. She was the last to leave the cabin, returning on some trivial pretext after the others had started for the boat. She kneeled down beside the bed in which she had spent so many nights, and offered up a prayer for the safety of her primeval man, and crushing his locket to her lips, she murmured, I love you. And because I love you, I believe in you. But if I did not believe, still should I love. Had you come back for me, and had there been no other way, I would have gone into the jungle with you, forever. End of chapters 23 and 24 of Tarzan of the Apes by Edgar Rice Burroughs. Read by your host, Kimberly Sue Iverson. This is the first of 3 episodes before the end. And the beginning of December, I think, will be more regular posts and take a pause from the stories. Then I'll return with the next story, which I don't know what that is. I may or may not, for Christmas, do something like I did for Halloween. I was going to say Thanksgiving. For Halloween, as a short, just a whimsical little thing. If I find anything of interest for a short story or whatever, it taxed me to end up getting that Halloween one. So I don't hold me to that. It's just if I come across something and am able to get it up with time, because I got behind on my posting with that, and then with my lack of sleep this past week, which is why I was late with that other episode. I know it was still posted on Wednesday, but for me, even if I post on Wednesday, that's late because I want it up early so that as soon as Wednesday hits, there it is. And that's just from my sleep schedule getting all messy and wonky. So hopefully I can get my sleep back on track a little bit more. I'm still not on track completely, because I will say that when I actually am able to go to bed consistently at 9:30 and wake like I used to around 6:30 or 7, but I'm still waking up at around 7:20, slowly attempting to get that back. So that is actually me scooting it back. But the bedtime is the one I haven't been doing as well. I'm sure once I get that all sorted out, especially, the rest will start to follow with being able to slowly progress into a more steady schedule for everything. But we shall see. Writing and sleep are the 2 biggest things that I need to get back on schedule and into my schedule consistently to get everything sorted for especially my mental space. I will see you next week. More to come. Would you like to make a difference? A gift of 5, 10, 15, or more would make a huge impact on my ability to keep this podcast going for you and upgrade my equipment. With your gift, we can grow this together, because I want to make this the best I can for you. And frankly, you would help so much with far more than that. You'd be helping me change my life. Give today at ko-fi.com/Kimberly Sue Iverson. That's ko-fi.com/Kimberly Sue Iverson. Your presence here matters so much to me, so thank you for being here. I am beyond grateful you chose to spend this time with me. What are your thoughts? Share with me and start a conversation. Just don't be rude about it. Remember, kings and queens, everyone is fighting battles inside nobody can see. Who are you willing to see today? And who are you willing to let see you today? I hope someone can bring a smile to you today, or you can bring a smile to someone else. If you would like the chance for your story to be read, whether it's something you wrote, a story passed down in your family, or have a suggestion on a story to read, get in touch. Stories to read at KimberlySueIverson.com. That's stories to read at KimberlySueIverson.com. If you'd like to follow my socials, I would love to have you. Don't ever hesitate to comment and say hi either. find me under @KimberlySueIverson for most sites: Instagram, Threads, Facebook, Blue Sky, and TikTok. There's also a Facebook page for Redhead Rewriting Reality. X is the only site I use Kimber Bytes on. I also have a newsletter for my work. That's bit.ly/lettersfromkimberly. bit.ly/lettersfromkimberly. I always try to use the same profile picture and name no matter where I am, but you can always find my links on my link cave. That's KimberlySueIverson.com/linkcave. That's LINKCAVE. What follows are bloopers or mistakes that I made during the recording of this podcast. On his haunches. On his haunch. That's easy to say. Of a man squatting on his... Why? That word. He saw the figure of a man squatting on his haunches. Close enough.